All right, for chapter 26, I'll be going over the reproductive system, and this will be the last chapter that we cover in Bio 169. Here you see some of the major functions for the reproductive system. And function number one, they're not listed in any particular order, but function one is the production of gametes. And so if you're not familiar with that term, I've got it kind of defined here on the next slide. Gametes are the sex cells in males and females. And so in males, these sex cells would be sperm cells that are produced by the testes. And the female gamete would be the egg cell or the oocyte in females, and that's being produced inside of the ovaries. The second function here is fertilization. Fertilization occurs when those gametes unite, the egg cell and the sperm cell unite, and that creates a fertilized egg cell, also known as a zygote. And then number three, we'll talk a little bit more about sex hormones as we go through each of the two sexes. We'll look at those sex hormones. We've already talked about these way back in chapter 16 for the endocrine system, but we'll kind of revisit them again and kind of see their role here in the development of sex organs and in the development of sex characteristics. So there again, formation of the sex cells, that's one of the primary functions of the male and female reproductive system. And we're going to be talking a little bit about meiosis. You may remember a little bit about meiosis if you've had some general biology class along the way. This is a type of cell division. There's really two main types of cell division. You may remember mitosis and meiosis. And so I want to briefly review both of those. But it's this type of cell division, meiosis, that leads to the formation of these gametes, right? And so if you think of it in terms of chromosomes, if you know that a human diploid cell has 46 chromosomes, right? And so that's its diploid number. It's got two pairs or two copies of each chromosome from, one copy from the maternal side, one copy from the paternal side. And so each cell is going to have, each diploid cell will have two copies. And so it'll be 46 chromosomes. Each gamete, each sex cell is going to be what's called haploid. It has one copy of each chromosome, and that haploid number is 23. So if we kind of plow that back up here to our term gametes, sperm cells in males, sperm cell would have 23 chromosomes, and an egg cell would have 23 chromosomes. During fertilization, those two unite. The sperm cell transfers its chromosomes over to the egg cell, and then that creates a diploid cell, a fertilized egg cell, zygote, which would have 46 chromosomes. So let's kind of look at just a side-by-side comparison of mitosis and meiosis. Notice that there are some similarities between these two. First of all, they're both types of cell division. Cell division occurs in both of these processes. Also, you both start with a parent type cell, beginning cell, and you end up with daughter cells. Right? So they're all similarities. You have replication that takes place for each mitosis, each stage here for mitosis, meiosis. There's replication that takes place. There's also cell division. Let's look at that parent cell to kind of start us out. This is just an example, and so each line here represents a chromosome. So for example, this parent cell here would have 1, 2, 3, 4 chromosomes in that cell, and that's what they started out with on this side of the example. So right off the bat, we kind of start out the same. You would go through DNA replication. If you remember looking at the cell cycle, this process is taking place in the S phase of the cell cycle. S is synthesis. So now you go through the replication process here, and you end up with a cell that has doubled its DNA content. Right? It's going through that S part of the cell cycle. It's doubled its DNA content. And if you look here, you still have, you count the number of chromosomes, you still have 4 chromosomes, 1, 2, 3, and 4. But now they're double the amount of DNA. Then we're going to proceed then to cell division, right? Cell division. Cell division is shown here this cell will divide. And notice that you end up with daughter cells that have a 2N number. That's the diploid number. I still have 2 copies of each chromosome. I started out here with a diploid cell. That's 4 chromosomes. I end up with 2 cells that have 4 chromosomes. They're both diploid. They both have 2 copies of each chromosome. And they should be identical. They should be identical to each other. They should be identical to the parent. Right. So as long as there's no kind of mutation or DNA problem going on through this process, these should be identical to each other and identical to the parent. Meiosis does things a little differently. Right. So I started out with a diploid cell. I went through replication. I have a cell division event here. And at this point, now I have 2 cells that only have 2 chromosomes. So I've reduced the number here of chromosomes in half. So this is reduction. I've reduced the number of chromosomes. I had 4 chromosomes to start with. Now each cell only has 2 chromosomes. The other main difference here for meiosis, or another main difference for meiosis, is that there's 2 cell division events. Right, so cell division takes place here, but also takes place again. And so now each of these cells will divide and form a new cell. These are the daughter cells, but notice they're not the same as the parent. For one, they're all haploid. I've only got 2 chromosomes in each of these cells. So these are haploid cells, and because I went through cell division twice, I've got 4 of these daughter cells versus only 2 produced in mitosis. Right. And so meiosis, again, is a special type or special case of cell division that you're going to only find in the production of gametes. So each one of these cells, each one of these daughter cells would represent a gamete. You can think of this, and I'll show you other diagrams as we go through. But you can think of this cell almost like a stem cell. It's a starting cell for sperm cells or a starting cell for egg cells. And so at the end, you would have, if this is a starting sperm stem cell, it's called a spermatogonium. You would start there, and then you would end up with 4 sperm cells at the end. And they would all be haploid. Your textbook kind of walks through this as well, and they have very similar pictures, I guess, here. And so you kind of walk through and kind of follow along. It starts out with meiosis. This is, again, they pick just a random number. They pick a cell that would have 4 chromosomes. Remember, a human cell is going to start out with 46 chromosomes. And so this is a diploid cell. It's going to go through prophase, and that's where the chromosomes were first visible. They shorten, thicken. Now you see chromosomes. Before it was an interphase. If you remember that cell cycle, it would have been an interphase, and now I'm entering into the cell division part of the cell cycle. And then, of course, eventually you get to metaphase, where these chromosomes kind of line up in roughly the middle portion of the cell. And then anaphase, the chromosomes are literally pulled to the opposite ends or to the poles of the cell. And then telophase begins separating these two and forming the 2 daughter cells. And so notice, again, this is reductional because remember we started out with 4 chromosomes in a cell, and now by the end of telophase, you're going to end up with 2 new cells. These are still daughter cells, 2 cells here. But each one only has 2 chromosomes, so you've reduced the chromosome number. Then you go through essentially the process again, right? So now you have the second meiotic division, beginning again with prophase. Now it's called prophase 2, so it's stage 2. Prophase 2, the chromosomes are here again, and they still line up in the middle of the cell roughly. That's metaphase 2. Anaphase 2, notice that each section of the chromosome is being pulled apart. Each section is known as a chromatid. Each section is now being pulled apart to go into a separate cell. This is non-reductional, what's called non-reductional cell division. In other words, I didn't reduce the chromosome number again. I reduced the DNA content, but I didn't reduce the number of chromosomes again. In other words, this cell, we started out here with 2 chromosomes in prophase 1 and 2, or prophase 2, we started out with 2 chromosomes. We went to metaphase 2, we went to anaphase 2, now we're in telophase 2, and I still have 2 chromosomes for each cell. So that's just a little bit about meiosis. Go back and review that a little bit, kind of understand the main steps there. And we're going to refer back to this in just a little bit. But before we do, let's look at some of the main male reproductive organs to kind of find out where this process is really taking place. Where is the process of meiosis taking place? Well, right here it is. It's in the male reproductive organ, which is known as the testes, or primary male reproductive organ. The testes, that's plural. This is the location of sperm cell production and development. And the sperm cell, again, is the gamete. It's going to be haploid. It's a product of meiosis. And the hormone testosterone. We've seen this before. We talked about it a little bit before back in chapter 16, testosterone, the main male reproductive hormone. Specifically, or kind of clarify where all of this is really taking place is in a set of tubes known as the seminiferous tubules. If you look at kind of a cross section or a mid-sagittal section through the testis, you would see that there are many different coiled up tubes or tubules known as the seminiferous tubules. What this image does is it takes a tubule and then it looks at just a cross section of it. And so this again is kind of looking at microscopic type image. That's just a drawing up here. And you have the actual microscopic image. Total magnification is about 200 times. And so what they've done is they've taken a section through that tubule and they put it on the slide, stained it. And now we're kind of looking here. We'll kind of look at this artist depiction here. But this is where the sperm cells are actually being produced. That's where the actual, and we're going to talk about the different cell types, but that's where the starting cell is going to be located. That's going to go through the process of meiosis. So let's look at some of these cell types. All of this again, and even this picture is a little different than the last one. It's trying to say the same thing. It's basically taking a cross section through a tubule, through a seminiferous tubule. And we need to kind of talk about 3 main cell types. Number 1 is the interstitial cell. Interstitial cell. Lying kind of on the perimeter, you would find interstitial cells. Sometimes you see these referred to as Leydig cells. These are essentially your endocrine cells. If you go back and look in chapter 16, we talk about endocrinology, and we know that the testes produce testosterone. We didn't really define the actual endocrine cell producing the hormone, but here it is. It's called an interstitial cell producing, secreting testosterone. So that's inside of the testes here. And then also within the tubules, you would find spermatogenic cells. Genic, formation of sperm is what that means. Spermatogenic, they form sperm cells. Essentially, you can think of these as stem type cells. Sometimes you see these referred to as spermatogonia, and that's what the drawing shows here. But along the periphery, along the border, you would have these spermatogonia cells, and they're going to start to divide and then go through meiosis to produce the actual gametes or sperm cells. Another cell type that you would find here, kind of spaced in between the spermatogonia, would be what are called sustentacular cells. All right. The word looks a little strange, but if you notice the word sustenance or part of the word sustenance within that word, that's what these cells do. It provides the sustenance or the nutrients that the sperm cells are going to need for their development and their survival. All right, so we have all of this going on inside of the seminiferous tubules. You also have a structure known as the epididymis, also coiled tubes, a series of coiled tubes. And you kind of see from the diagram, there's kind of a head region that is more superior there. You got a region known as the body, and in the middle, and a section of the epididymis more inferior called the tail. But they're very coiled up tubes again. The main thing you need to know here is that this is where sperm cells kind of finish their developmental process. They finish that maturation or developmental, and they're being stored until they are released. Then if you follow those tubules on around, you come to a tubule known as the ductus deferens. Sometimes you'll see this referred to as the vas deferens. This is where we get the term vasectomy, which is where this ductus deferens, where this tube is actually cut. And that's for male birth control there. And that should prevent sperm cells from leaving the testicular area. But if you notice, that extends from the epididymis, and you can follow this tube known as the ductus deferens. So there's just another side view here. Here's the epididymis here, and you can follow the ductus deferens all around. It will kind of circumspect through about the side of the urinary bladder, where it's going to basically receive or kind of come close to 3 different glands that we need to talk about. 3 glands. Each of these glands will be producing a secretion that will go into a mixture known as semen that includes the sperm cells, but also other ingredients from these glands: a seminal vesicle, prostate gland, and the bulbourethral gland. Let's kind of look at these glands, seminal vesicles, and that's kind of the first one that is here, and really one that contributes the majority of the composition of semen. It provides a secretion. It's an exocrine gland. It provides secretion that contains fructose, ends in OSE, so we know that's a type of carbohydrate. This carbohydrate provides nourishment, nutrients for the sperm cells, and also protein, really in the form of amino acids, also providing the proper nutrients for the sperm cells. Notice that it also says that the secretion is alkaline or a basic type solution. In other words, it's pH balanced. So the next gland I want to mention a few things about is the prostate gland. You can see it on the diagram here. It's kind of highlighted in purple. It surrounds the urethra. It's about the size of a walnut, and it contributes to about 20 to 30% of the composition of semen. It is an alkaline secretion as well, and so that just means it's more basic in pH, and so it helps to balance the pH of the sperm cells, making sure that they have the proper pH and the proper nutrients. It even has some antimicrobial properties, and again, that just helps kind of protect those fragile sperm cells here. And then the last gland, a very small gland, you can kind of see again in the diagram a little further down, is the bulbourethral gland. And this particular gland secretes a small amount of mucus. And again, it's being secreted into through a small duct into the urethra directly. It helps to lubricate the urethra. Also helps to, because it is basic, it is alkaline, also helps to neutralize any urine that is still remaining in the urethra, because again, those sperm cells are going to be passing through the urethra, and so it's going to help to kind of balance the pH since the urine is going to be more acidic. Last thing I want to kind of go over here as far as the male reproductive system is the process known as spermatogenesis. And of course, the definition is there for you: the formation of sperm cells the creation of sperm cells is part of that name. We'll mention a few things here about spermatogenesis, and then when we talk about the production of egg cells or oocytes, that's oogenesis for females. And we'll kind of compare and contrast a little bit, but one thing that kind of stands out here about spermatogenesis is that it does begin at puberty. That's different than how females go through oogenesis, or production of egg cells, and so we'll see that in just a little bit. Remember that the seminiferous tubules, we kind of looked at kind of that cross-section image there, but that's the location of where you're going to find these starting stem cells of the spermatogonia. This is plural, and so spermatogonium would be singular. But these sperm cells, these are the starting stem cells, spermatogonia. And then we also talked a little bit about the sustentacular cells, those cells that are really in charge of helping provide the sustenance or the nutrition for the developing sperm cells. This diagram does a pretty good job, or this figure does a pretty good job of outlining some of the main steps in spermatogenesis. We just kind of follow along. What you're looking at kind of is again, kind of a cross-section view of kind of inside the seminiferous tubules. And so on the periphery here, remember, kind of outside of that, you would have interstitial cells. These are the endocrine cells producing the testosterone. But on the periphery side, you kind of have these spermatogonia. These are those stem cells that start the process of spermatogenesis. Notice that they've listed the chromosome number here. So these are diploid cells. They have 46 chromosomes, 2 copies from each parent. Initially, that stem cell is going to go through mitosis. In other words, it's going to make an exact copy of itself. So it divides, it goes through prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, just like any of our other cells that are going through mitosis would, cell division. It makes copies of itself. And then it basically is differentiating, it develops, that copy develops into what's known as a primary spermatocyte. Now, one of the primary spermatocytes from those daughter cells, one of them will now continue in cell division, will start the process of going through meiosis. And so they kind of outline, the basic idea here for meiosis. You've got a parent cell that's diploid. It's got 46 chromosomes. It goes through a reductional cell division, and it gives you 2 daughter cells. These are haploid now. Reduce the chromosome number in half. And so these are haploid. They're going to have 23 chromosomes in each cell. Remember that meiosis is a 2-step process, and so now you go through repeat meiosis, and you'll have meiosis part 2. And that will end up, this is non-reductional, and so you end up with 4 haploid cells, right? And so these become the gametes. As these now are completed the cell division stage, they will continue in their overall maturation, maturity to mature into the fully developed sperm cells. Last thing I want to mention here a little bit, this is kind of a nice table. We talked about these hormones back in chapter 16 for the endocrine system, but just kind of as a review, this table actually does a pretty nice job. Hopefully these names are still familiar. Remember that GnRH is a gonadotropin releasing hormone. This is one of the releasing hormones we talked about from the hypothalamus in the brain. It kind of starts the pathway, really, because this GnRH goes through, remember that portal area going from the hypothalamus down to the pituitary gland. So GnRH makes its way through that portal pathway down to the pituitary gland, the anterior lobe of it, where it stimulates the production and release or secretion of LH, that's the luteinizing hormone, and FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. Both of these are being produced and released from the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, where they have different main functions here. LH in males stimulates the secretion of testosterone. So their target cell would be those interstitial cells inside of the testes, inside of the the seminiferal, right on the within the seminiferal tubules. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone for males, that helps to promote and start up the process of spermatogenesis, the formation of sperm cells. Testosterone, we mentioned earlier, but here it is again. It is being produced within the testes, specifically those endocrine cells called the interstitial cells, where it has a direct involvement in developing and maintaining reproductive organs, the testes, and then also the development and maturation of these sperm cells. So that kind of concludes. That's just a brief overview of the male reproductive system. We'll kind of go through the same with the female reproductive system next.